Hollywood spent the early 2000s so consumed by franchise math and opening weekend targets that even when it got something right, it didn't know what it had. Some of these films made money, some got nominated, and none of them got what they deserved. These 8 films didn't vanish because audiences rejected them. They vanished from the conversation because nobody in the industry knew quite how to talk about them, and every single one of them has been making that look stupid ever since. Before Martin McDonagh shot a single frame of In Bruges, producers on his short film Six Shooter tried to cut a scene to save time, and McDonagh agreed. But 5 minutes later they reversed course, because Brendan Gleeson had told them he was walking if they even thought about touching it. Ray is a guilt-wrecked hitman sent to hide in the medieval Belgian city of Bruges after a job goes catastrophically wrong, and McDonagh shoots the city less like a location and more like a place designed to punish people who deserve it. The final act is almost unreasonably generous given what precedes it. Gleeson's leap from the tower is the only moment a character makes a genuine, irreversible choice, and McDonagh earns it by spending 90 minutes making sure you understand exactly what it costs. To make that weight land, McDonagh locked Gleeson and Colin Farrell in a room for 3 weeks before filming, dissecting every line until there were no questions left on the first day of the shoot. Farrell had nearly declined the role entirely, exhausted by blockbuster stardom and skeptical of his own instincts, but the Golden Globe he won for it is the clearest record of what he was capable of when he finally stopped second-guessing himself. Disney wanted the monologue cut from 25th Hour, the scene where Edward Norton stands at a mirror and methodically curses every borough of New York before turning the rage inward at himself, and Spike Lee refused, telling them it was the emotional core of the film and the only scene that justified everything around it. Monty Brogan is a drug dealer spending his last 24 hours of freedom before a 7-year sentence, and Lee films his goodbye to a city still raw from September 11th, not as backdrop, but as the actual subject, so that Monty's personal reckoning and New York's collective one become the same thing. The mirror scene works because Norton is performing for himself and not for an audience, which means every word lands like something being said out loud for the first time. And the pivot at the end, where the rage collapses into self-indictment, is where the film locates its actual argument about accountability. Lee filmed the Ground Zero sequence through an office abandoned by the Bank of Japan after the attacks, bypassing official channels entirely. And the workers visible through the window are actual recovery crews, which means the film's most haunting image required no staging at all. The film earned around $23 million, and Disney filed it as a modest result. But Roger Ebert added it to his great movies list 7 years later, which is one way to settle a disagreement about what the core of a film actually is. The studio pushed Tony Gilroy to cut the horse scene from Michael Clayton, the moment where George Clooney's fixer drives up a hill alone at 4 in the morning, gets out, and stands in a field watching horses for no reason the plot requires. Gilroy held it because without that scene, the ending is a plot resolution instead of a human one. Clayton is the man a powerful law firm calls when a wealthy client's problem needs to disappear quietly. The film is built around what happens when the problem is a chemical company knowingly poisoning thousands of people, and Clayton finds himself unable to make it go away fast enough to outrun his own conscience. Tilda Swinton constructed both scenes herself with Gilroy. First, the bathroom panic attack where Karen is sweat-soaked and barely holding together. Then the mirror sequence where she rehearses corporate talking points so many times they sound spontaneous. And together they show you everything you need to know about a woman performing competence she does not feel.
Say it.
$10 million, your account, the moment this meeting is
Karen, everyone's waiting.
I'm coming, Don.
It works as a compressed version of the entire film's argument, that competence and guilt can occupy the same body simultaneously without resolving each other. Clooney was carrying the film as both lead and producer, under constant pressure about the pacing. Critics noted later that his visible exhaustion as Clayton was less performance than reality because Clooney was genuinely that tired. 4 Oscar nominations, a studio that remained nervous about the runtime until the reviews arrived, and a film that has quietly become the standard against which every corporate thriller since has been measured without anyone formally acknowledging it. Julia Roberts and Drew Barrymore each took $250,000 to appear in Confessions of a Dangerous Mind, a fraction of what either was earning because George Clooney called them personally and asked them to support his directorial debut, which tells you something about the goodwill he had accumulated before spending it on a film about a game show host who claims to have killed 33 people for the CIA. Chuck Barris created The Gong Show and The Dating Game, and spent decades performing a specific kind of cheerful American vacancy on television. And the film asks what it would mean if that vacancy was not stupidity, but the cultivated blankness of someone living a double life the entire time. Charlie Kaufman's script structures the whole thing as an unreliable confession and never confirms or denies whether Barris actually killed anyone. And Sam Rockwell plays him with the energy of a man who has told this story so many times he can no longer locate the boundary between what happened and what he needed to believe happened. The CIA officially released a statement calling Barris's claims ridiculous and absolutely not true. That denial has been in circulation for over 20 years, and if anything, it has made the story more durable rather than less, which is either proof that Barris was right about the power of television, or proof that the CIA does not understand how curiosity works. The producer spent 20 years pursuing the rights to Perfume, a novel considered unfilmable because its subject is smell, and the reclusive author finally agreed for $12 million in 2001, which meant the director had to find a way to make an audience experience an invisible sense through a purely visual medium, or bankrupt one of Europe's oldest studios in the attempt. Jean-Baptiste Grenouille is born in an 18th century Parisian fish market with a supernatural sense of smell and no scent of his own, a void that makes him a ghost to the world, and his answer is to murder young women and distill their essence into a perfume powerful enough to force humanity to love him. The climax requires 750 real extras to descend into a mass sensory breakdown in a town square in Spain. The director refused CGI because he believed the scene required actual bodies, and the theater group hired to choreograph it kept performers in near-nude conditions during a freezing week until several required medical attention for hypothermia. Ben Whishaw was cast over more recognizable actors because he was considered physically unremarkable enough to disappear into Grenouille's invisibility. He wore costumes aged with actual rotting organic matter throughout the shoot, and the performance launched him from theater obscurity to the Bond franchise within a few years. The film cost 50 million euros, was the most expensive German production ever made at the time, and grossed over 130 million worldwide. Yet it is almost never mentioned when people discuss the great films of that decade, which is either an oversight or a vindication of Grenouille's central thesis about what it takes to be noticed. Maggie Gyllenhaal refused the protective padding during Secretary's spanking sequences, insisting the character's reaction needed to be rooted in genuine physical sensation, and by the end of the first day had developed a bruise described as the size of a football, which meant the production needed specialized body makeup artists for every subsequent nude scene, because Lee's skin was supposed to look healed as the story moved forward. Lee Holloway is a young woman recently released from a mental institution, managing her anxiety through self-harm, who discovers that the eccentric attorney she works for provides the exact structure her psychology requires. Shaneberg frames her submission not as victimhood, but as the first act of genuine agency she has ever been allowed, which is the specific reading the film requires you to accept or reject before the ending makes sense. James Spader maintained strict psychological distance throughout production, refused to give Gyllenhaal his phone number, alternated between lavishing attention on her and treating her like a stranger from one day to the next, so that her character's desperate uncertainty about where she stood with Mr. Grey was never manufactured. It was just what Gyllenhaal was actually feeling between takes. $4 million budget, $9.3 million worldwide, a Golden Globe nomination for Gyllenhaal, and the film was classified as a kinky indie oddity and largely forgotten. A Rotten Tomatoes critic recently wrote that it feels more like something A24 would release in 2022 than a Lionsgate film from 2002, which is accurate and about 20 years too late to do anyone involved any good. Woody Allen cast Kate Winslet in Match Point because he mistakenly believed British funding rules required the entire cast to be British. But when he discovered he was wrong, Winslet dropped out a week before filming to spend time with her family, and he replaced her with Scarlett Johansson, who was 19, had never met Allen or her co-star, and filmed her opening scene at 7 in the morning after flying overnight from New York with zero scene rehearsal. Chris Wilton is a former tennis pro who engineers his way into a wealthy London family through marriage and sustains a dangerous affair with an American actress also connected to the family. When she becomes pregnant and threatens to unravel everything, the film commits to the move almost no thriller will make. It lets him get away with it, cleanly, on a lucky break, with no punishment and no consequence. Allen holds that ending against the entire weight of genre convention because the film's argument is that luck governs more of life than we are prepared to admit. A story that rewards its villain with a fortunate accident is more honest about that than any amount of moral architecture that punishes bad behavior on schedule. Jonathan Rhys-Meyers said Allen directed him through 4 incredibly difficult scenes in one day, and the only words Allen spoke to him the entire time were good morning. In his 2020 memoir, Allen described the 19-year-old Johansson as sexually radioactive and wrote that meeting her required fighting through the pheromones, and 20 years later that line follows the film into every conversation it enters. Steven Soderbergh's first choice for Solaris was Daniel Day-Lewis, who was unavailable because Scorsese had him for Gangs of New York, so George Clooney got the role because he was Soderbergh's producing partner and contractually had to receive the script, which is an origin story significantly less poetic than a film about grief and the impossibility of letting go probably deserves. Dr. Chris Kelvin is a psychologist sent to a space station orbiting a sentient planet that has begun recreating the crew's most painful memories as physical presences, and when Kelvin arrives, the planet gives him back his dead wife, warm and complete and real by every measure except the one that cannot be faked. Soderbergh treats the planet as atmosphere rather than plot, and spends the film entirely inside Kelvin's question, whether a perfect recreation of someone you loved is worth more than the honest fact of their absence. Fox responded to that by making Clooney's bare backside the centerpiece of the marketing campaign. That strategy enraged Clooney and did nothing for ticket sales, and audiences who had been promised a sci-fi thriller gave the film an F from CinemaScore, one of the lowest audience verdicts a major studio release can receive. The film earned $30 million worldwide against a $47 million budget, and Soderbergh considers it among his finest work. The people who found it without the marketing tend to arrive at the same conclusion, usually alone and usually late at night, which is probably the correct viewing condition for a film about what we do with the dead. If you've ever felt like the best version of something got quietly forgotten before anyone could argue for it, you already understand every film on this list. The box office never captured what they cost the people who made them, but the films are still here and the decisions that dismiss them aren't.